The convoy kicked up dust that hung in the air for 30 seconds after the truck stopped. Elena Vasquez waited until everyone else had climbed down from the bed before she grabbed her duffel and jumped. Her boots hit the ground hard, harder than necessary. She corrected her landing midway through, a subtle shift in weight that no one noticed because no one was looking at her. They were looking at the trucks, at the supplies, at the usual logistics inventory. "Welcome to Crimson Peak," a voice called out. Sergeant Marcus Miller appeared from the command tent, a thick-necked man with a kind of confidence that came from 4 tours and no close calls. He was tall, scarred across one forearm, and moving with the casual authority of someone who'd never questioned his place in a room. "You must be the supply clerk." Elena shifted her duffel to her other shoulder. "Logistics coordinator, but yes." Miller's eyes flicked down to her boots, back up to her face. He was already making calculations, sizing her up the way drill sergeants size up fresh recruits. She could see him mentally cross her off his list of people who mattered. "Right, logistics coordinator." He said it like the distinction meant nothing. "We've got 8 soldiers in Echo Platoon. Small unit, tight quarters. You'll bunk with the other support staff in the East Barracks. Chow is at 1800 hours. Armorer will get you oriented on the weapons rack sometime tomorrow. Questions?" "No, Sergeant." "Good. Corporal Chen will show you around." He was already turning back toward the tent, dismissing her the way officers dismiss paperwork. "Welcome aboard." Chen materialized from somewhere, a wiry guy with a quick smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was a radio operator, Elena learned within the first minute of walking across the base. Been here 8 months. The firebase was quiet. Too quiet, he said, like that was supposed to mean something. He talked a lot, filling silence the way some people needed to breathe. The barracks was a corrugated structure that radiated heat in waves. 3 bunks, 1 occupied. The woman in the bottom bunk didn't look up when they entered. She had a paperback Western novel propped on her chest and no interest in new arrivals. "That's Mendez," Chen said. "Supply sergeant. She's intense. Best to stay out of her way unless you need something from stores." Elena nodded and claimed a bunk on the opposite end. She set her duffel down and didn't unpack it. The room smelled like sweat and the particular chemical staleness of military-issue bedding. Through the single window, she could see the perimeter fence and, beyond it, the rocky scrub that surrounded the firebase on all sides. "You should grab food," Chen was saying. "The cook's actually decent. That's going to sound like a low bar, but you wait until you get rotated to another base. You'll understand." The mess hall was crowded but not full. 8 soldiers, including Miller. They were seated in 2 clusters, one table of 4 that looked like they'd known each other for years, laughing about something that had happened during a patrol. The other table held a younger soldier, maybe 22, who was eating methodically without talking. Miller glanced at her when she came in. So did 2 of the soldiers at his table. She caught the moment of recognition, the mental classification. New, female, support staff, beneath the threshold of serious attention. She made her meal, rice, chicken, beans, and sat alone at a table by the door. This was fine. This was expected. She'd been reassigned here to disappear into the system, to be invisible, and invisibility was something she'd become exceptionally good at. But halfway through her meal, she became aware of a different kind of attention. Not dismissive, observational. The young soldier at the other table, the one eating alone, was glancing at her. Not at her face, at her hands. Elena set her fork down and covered her hands with her napkin. The scars were old, but visible. Calluses in specific places. The kind of damage that came from one particular activity, repeated 10,000 times over 10 years. She'd gotten good at hiding them, wearing gloves when she could, keeping her hands low. But in a small firebase with limited resources and everyone eating at close quarters, being careful wasn't quite enough. The young soldier looked away when their eyes met. He was military. The posture gave that away, but young enough that he hadn't yet learned not to stare. "You coming to the briefing at 1900? Chen had found a seat across from her. He had 3 plates of food. Miller runs through the perimeter schedule, supply levels, that kind of thing. You should probably show up, make a good impression. Of course. The briefing was held in the command tent, which was larger than Elena expected. Miller stood in front of a map that was already 3 years out of date. She could tell by the marked positions. 5 soldiers attended, including herself and Chen. The other 3 were the ones she'd seen at Miller's table: Private Garrett, Private Jackson, and Specialist Okafor. The young soldier who'd been watching her wasn't there. Supply drops come every 2 weeks unless we request emergency resupply, Miller was saying. He pointed to coordinates on the map. We're 8 clicks from the nearest friendly position. Drone support is limited to daylight hours on Wednesday and Saturday. Everything else is on us. Elena listened, but she was also mapping, doing the math. 8 kilometers. The terrain was exposed on 3 sides, rising gradually toward higher ground to the north and east. The firebase itself was positioned on a natural ridge, which was good for defense and terrible for maintaining low visibility. The perimeter fence was new, reinforced in the last month, judging by the uncorroded metal brackets. "Vasquez," Miller said suddenly. "You with us?" She'd been staring at the map too hard, thinking too hard. She brought her attention back to his face. "Yes, Sergeant. You ever done this before? Stationed at a forward base?" "Once, 3 years ago. Iraq." Something flickered in Miller's expression. Not respect, but something like acknowledgement. She'd been somewhere dangerous. That meant she at least had baseline expectations of what this was. 3 years is a long time. Things have changed. We're going to need you sharp. Any problems with the supply system, you report directly to Mendez, and she'll escalate to me. We operate lean. Nothing gets wasted. You understand?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Good. Dismissed." The briefing broke up. Garrett was already laughing about something as they filed out. Something about the last supply drop that came missing half of what was ordered. Jackson joined in, complaining about freeze-dried rations that tasted like plastic. Miller didn't laugh with them, but he didn't shut them down either. Elena left before Chen could attach himself to her again. She had a lot of information now, and more importantly, she had a sense of the baseline, the perimeter schedule, the drone schedule, the positioning, the fact that Miller was competent but not paranoid, which meant he'd probably never check the inventory on the supply crates twice. She walked the fence line as the sun was dropping, counting posts, measuring distances. The young soldier who'd been watching her at dinner was on watch at the north corner. He nodded at her as she passed, trying not to stare at her hands again. By the time she was back in the barracks, darkness had settled completely. Mendez was still reading her Western. Elena lay on her bunk and stared at the corrugated ceiling and tried very hard not to think about Sarah's face, or the way a 3-second hesitation could echo across 10 years. Some things, she'd learned, didn't have expiration dates. Tomorrow, she would be invisible, for as long as it took. The first real test came on day 3. Elena was in the supply tent, reorganizing the ammunition racks because Mendez had arranged them by caliber rather than by tactical priority. It was a small thing, barely worth noticing, but it meant that if Echo Platoon needed to move fast, they'd waste 30 seconds finding the right rounds. She was moving boxes when Garrett and Jackson came in looking for cleaning kits. "Yo, supply lady," Garrett called out. "Where do you keep the—" Elena pointed without looking. "Second shelf, back left. The green containers." "How did you—" Jackson started. "Mendez mentioned it yesterday," Elena said, which was only half true. Mendez hadn't mentioned it. Elena had watched where Mendez pulled the last cleaning kit from and remembered. They left with the kits and didn't think much about it. But Elena knew that Mendez had been watching. The supply sergeant had a territorial streak that made her notice when someone understood her system better than they should. The second incident happened during weapons training. Miller had called a session, nothing formal, just a chance to keep everyone's skills sharp. The small range was set up on the western edge of the firebase, behind the command tent. Echo platoons cycled through their rifles, taking shots at targets 200 meters out. It was standard marksmanship work. Nothing serious. Elena had been assigned to help reset targets. She was walking downrange when Private Okafor's rifle jammed. He swore, ejected the magazine, and started to clear the obstruction. He wasn't doing it right. The bolt was going to jam worse if he kept forcing it that way. She was 3 steps away when she said, "Stop. Rotate the charging handle counterclockwise first. It'll release the pressure." Okafor looked at her. So did Miller. "How do you know that?" Miller asked. Elena's heart rate didn't change. Her breathing didn't accelerate. Those were things she'd learned to control a long time ago. "I qualified on every weapon system when I was stationed in Iraq. Had to know how to clear field jams." It was a plausible answer. Logistics coordinators who'd done even one tour usually had some weapons training. Miller nodded and moved on. But she caught him watching her for the rest of the session. Not suspicious, exactly. Just attentive. That night she heard them talking in the tent next to the barracks. Her bunk was against the corrugated wall that separated the logistics section from where the younger soldiers slept. Voices carried. "Something's weird about her," Jackson was saying. "She's just quiet," Chen replied. "Not everyone wants to be buddies." "No, I mean, did you see how she moved when she was resetting targets? Like, the way she walked downrange. That's not how most people move in a war zone." "How do most people move in a war zone?" This was Okafor. Like they're trying not to get shot. She moved like she was walking through her own house. Silence for a moment. Then, "You're reading too much into it. She's probably just confident." "Confident about what?" "She hasn't done anything since she got here except move boxes and know where we keep cleaning kits." Elena didn't move, didn't acknowledge that she could hear them. She lay in the dark and let her mind calculate what she'd revealed and what she'd hidden and what margin for error remained. The third incident was worse. Mendez had asked her to help inventory the heavy weapons storage. It wasn't a regular job, just something that needed doing. The storage shed was smaller than the supply tent, cramped, with racks of gear that hadn't been touched in weeks, including a case of L96 sniper rifles that the firebase maintained, but never used. Elena was moving boxes when one of the cases shifted. The rifle inside was going to fall. It was a physics problem. 30-pound case, unstable stack, 2-foot drop. She'd already assessed the angle and the likely impact point before the case had tilted more than 5 degrees. She caught it one-handed. Mendez was holding another box. She stared at Elena. Actually stared, the way someone stares when their brain is trying to reconcile what their eyes just saw with what they know about the world. "That's 100 pounds, Mendez said slowly. 65, Elena corrected without thinking. Then she caught herself. "I read the weight label when we inventory comes in." But Mendez was looking at Elena's arm, at the position of her grip, at the simple fact that no logistics coordinator should be able to catch a falling case of sniper rifles with one hand while holding another box. "You military?" Mendez asked. "What? You military, or did you go straight to logistics?" Elena set the case down carefully. "Both. I served first, then transitioned to support." "What unit?" "Different bases. Nothing glamorous." Mendez didn't push, but Elena could see the equation running behind her eyes. The scars, the reflexes, the knowledge of weapon systems and field procedures, the way she moved, the physical strength that didn't match the profile of someone who processed paperwork for a living. Mendez was smart enough to know something was off. She just wasn't sure what. By the end of the week, the whispers had evolved into actual conversations. Elena heard them in the mess hall, in the corridors, during the daily briefings. Nothing direct, nothing accusatory, but there was an undercurrent now, a current of uncertainty. Miller called her into the command tent on Friday morning. "How long have you been in the military?" he asked. No preamble, no small talk. 10 years, total, service and support. "What's your actual specialty?" Elena met his eyes. Miller was the kind of man who could tell when someone was lying, but he was also the kind who might accept a partial truth if it was well delivered. I worked in specialized logistics, handling sensitive equipment, tracking high-value assets, nothing classified that I can talk about. It wasn't a lie. It was a shape made of true things arranged to obscure the actual shape underneath. Miller studied her for a long moment. We're a small unit in a hot zone. I need to know if there's something I should know about the people under my command. There's nothing that affects my job here, Sergeant. Is there something that affects something else? Elena took a breath. This was the moment. She could feel it. Miller was sharp enough that he wouldn't accept evasion much longer, but the crisis hadn't come yet. She still had time to wait, to keep the secret locked down a little longer. I'm trained in more than I can talk about, she said carefully. But I'm here as a logistics coordinator. That's my job right now. That's all I'm doing. Miller watched her. She could see him processing, measuring, deciding whether to push or let it go. All right, he said finally. But if something changes, if something happens that makes you think you need to be anything other than logistics coordinator, you tell me first. Not Mendez, not Chen, me. Understood? Yes, Sergeant. Dismissed. Elena left the tent and breathed out slowly once she was outside. The perimeter was quiet. The sun was climbing. In the distance, she could hear the wind moving across the rocks, the distant sound of insects in the heat. Miller suspected something. Mendez suspected something. Chen was starting to notice. The younger soldiers had questions they hadn't asked yet. It wouldn't last much longer. Her invisibility had an expiration date, and it was approaching fast. She walked to the north corner of the firebase where the young soldier, Private Torres, she'd learned his name was pulling watch. He nodded at her as she passed. She nodded back and kept walking, her hands loose at her sides, her breathing steady, her mind already several steps ahead. 3 more days, maybe 4. Then everything would change. The attack started at 03:47 hours. The first sign was Torres hitting the alarm, 3 short bursts that meant contact, not drill. Elena was awake before the second burst finished. Military sleep was different from normal sleep. It sat lighter, ready to convert to action at the sound of a specific frequency. She was pulling on her boots when the first mortar round landed outside the perimeter. Not close, maybe 200 meters out. A ranging shot. The barracks erupted. Mendez was already moving, grabbing her body armor and rifle. Chen burst through the door, still pulling his vest on. Elena grabbed her gear and moved to the reinforced section at the rear of the structure. The area Miller had designated as the secondary position if the firebase came under attack. The second mortar round was closer, 150 meters. The fire was being corrected in real time, which meant spotters. Elena's mind was already running the calculation. Multiple positions, coordinated, professional. She made it to the command tent where Miller was already on the radio with the higher command. His voice was level, but his jaw was clenched. We have incoming from north and east. Estimate 20+ personnel. Small arms, mortars, possible heavy weapons. Negative on air support at this time. The response was static heavy and unhelpful. The third mortar round hit the east barracks. Not a direct hit, but close enough. The corrugated structure crumpled like paper. Elena heard the detonation through the ground, felt it in her teeth. Get to your positions, Miller barked. Return fire. Rules of engagement are hot. The firebase transformed. Soldiers moved to pre-planned positions. Okafor took the eastern gun emplacement. Jackson manned the northern position. Garrett was in the watchtower with a light machine gun. Chen was coordinating radio traffic. Mendez was in the supply tent, readying ammunition. Elena found herself in the command tent with Miller and Torres, who'd come in from the perimeter watch with his arm bleeding. Miller was running the defense with the kind of calm that only came from someone who'd done this before, and survived. The fourth mortar round landed in the center of the firebase. It didn't hit anything critical, but it was close enough to rattle the tent poles. They're not trying to destroy us, Miller said quietly. They're trying to pin us, keeping our heads down. He was right. Elena could see it now. The pattern. The mortars weren't walking toward the command tent or the weapon positions. They were landing in the open, driving everyone to cover, keeping the firebase's fighting positions suppressed. Then the small arms fire started. It came from the north and east, a coordinated assault from two sides. Professional rate of fire. Not panicked, not wild. These were trained soldiers with a plan. Elena could hear the ping of rounds hitting the corrugated metal of the structures, the distinct sound of different calibers working in concert. Jackson's gun position went silent. "Jackson's down," Okafor's voice came through the radio, tight with stress. "Sniper, we've got a sniper on the eastern ridge." Miller's expression didn't change, but Elena saw his hands tighten on the radio. "Cease fire from the east tower. Move to secondary position." But it was already too late. A second shot. Garrett screamed over the radio, a short, animal sound, and then nothing. The gun position in the north went quiet. "We've got counter-snipers," Miller said to no one in particular. He was doing the math. Elena could see it happening in real time. 2 gun positions down, active counter-snipers pinning them, enemy assault force advancing. No air support, no reinforcements incoming for at least 40 minutes, if the higher command could scramble them at all. "They're advancing," Torres reported from the window. His voice was shaking. "I can see movement at 300 meters, multiple squads." Miller pulled up the tactical map. The firebase was small, maybe 200 meters across at the widest point. From the north and east, the enemy could be at the wire in minutes. Inside the wire, in less than that. "How many rounds do we have for the remaining positions?" Miller asked. Mendez appeared in the tent opening. 2,000 for the rifles, maybe 500 for the machine gun if Jackson's position is still viable. We don't have heavy weapons." "We don't have anything," Miller said flatly. He looked at the map again, at the advancing enemy, at the counter-snipers that owned the high ground. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before they breach the perimeter. After that, it's a hostage situation, and command won't negotiate. We need fire superiority or we need to evacuate, and we can't evacuate." He was right, and he knew it. Elena could see it in his face. The equation didn't work. The numbers didn't add up. 10 soldiers, 6 of them combat effective. 30-plus enemy with better positioning and trained snipers. The firebase was about to become a tomb. Elena stood up. "Where are you going?" Miller asked. "The supply tent. I need 5 minutes." Miller grabbed her arm. "We don't have 5 minutes." Elena looked at him. Really looked at him. Sergeant Marcus Miller, who'd never questioned his authority, who'd sized her up the moment she arrived and filed her away as irrelevant, who'd caught her hesitation in the command tent earlier in the week and decided not to push, who was about to watch his entire unit die because he had no other options. "You do," she said, "if you give me 3 minutes." She didn't wait for permission. She moved toward the back of the firebase, toward the supply tent, moving low and fast because the sniper on the ridge was still working. A round snapped past, close enough to feel the pressure differential. She didn't slow down. The supply shed was at the rear, partially buried into the ridge itself. Mendez had asked why it was positioned there. "Inefficient," she'd said, "for supply distribution." Elena had never answered. She went to the back corner and moved aside 2 cases of freeze-dried rations. Behind them, built into a reinforced cavity that looked like part of the structural wall, was a long case, black, heavy, locked. Elena's hands moved on muscle memory. The combination was still there in her fingers, in the pattern her hands remembered. The case opened silently. The rifle lay in custom foam, pristine and waiting. The weapon was built on a Macmillan TAC-50 platform, modified and refined beyond the factory standard. The barrel had been hand-lapped. The scope was military-grade, mounted on rings that had cost more than a car. The ammunition in the case beside it was custom-loaded, each round weighted and measured and prepared for ranges where most people didn't even look. This was her rifle, the one she'd built over the course of 3 years, piece by piece, through channels that didn't officially exist. The one she'd brought with her because some weapons couldn't be left behind, and some obligations didn't have expiration dates. She was carrying it back to the command tent when the next sniper round hit the watchtower. The structure swayed. Garrett was already dead. But the round came through the platform anyway, the shooter confirming the kill. It was professional work. Precise. The counter-sniper was good. Not as good as Elena, but good. Miller was still at the map when she came through the tent flap. His eyes went to the rifle case, then to her face, then back to the rifle. She watched the moment of understanding happen. The scars, the reflexes, the knowledge, the physical capabilities all assembling themselves into a shape he could finally recognize. "You're not a logistics coordinator," he said. "No." Elena was already moving to the firing position at the tent's eastern wall. She set the rifle down and began assembling it with movements that were pure automation. Magazine, scope alignment, chamber check. "I'm a former special operations sniper. I left the military 7 years ago because I made a mistake that cost someone I loved. I've been trying to disappear ever since. And now? Now you're out of options and I'm out of reasons to hide." She looked through the scope at the eastern ridge. There, 200 meters. Elevated position. The counter-sniper was already looking for her, but he was looking for return fire from the eastern gun emplacement. He wasn't looking for fire from inside the firebase itself. Elena exhaled. The shot was clean. The distance was long, but the math was simple. Wind at 3 knots from the northwest. Temperature affecting air density. The target wasn't moving. She'd done 1,000 calculations like this in her sleep. The counter-sniper on the eastern ridge stopped moving. "You're not military anymore," Miller said. It wasn't a question. No. Elena was already reloading, already calculating the next position. The spotters were somewhere, coordinating the assault, probably on the northern ridge, where they'd have the best view of the firebase. "But I remember how to do this." The second shot came a moment later. A spotter went down on the northern ridge, 1,000 meters out. Almost a sniper's maximum effective range, but for this rifle, with ammunition this precise, it was like shooting at close range. The enemy assault force was slowing. Elena could see the confusion spreading through their ranks. The supporting fire was gone. The spotters were down. They had no idea where the fire was coming from. Miller was on the radio. "Echo platoon, we have fire support. Suppressive fire on my signal, go!" Okafor's gun position started working again. Jackson returned fire from his sheltered position. Chen was coordinating the movements, keeping everyone alive, keeping the assault from consolidating. Elena was already looking for the next target, the sniper on the western ridge. The one she'd missed in her initial sweep because he was good enough to stay hidden. She found him by his muzzle flash when he tried another shot at the firebase. Adjusted for the distance. Adjusted for the wind that had shifted. Made the shot. 3 counter-snipers down. The assault force in disarray. The firebase still intact. Miller looked at her with something that had moved past shock and into something closer to recognition. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena Vasquez." "Well, Elena Vasquez, welcome to actual combat operations." She didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the gallows humor. She was already recalculating distances, preparing for the next phase. The assault force would regroup. They would try a different approach. This wasn't over. But for the first time in 7 years, Elena felt something other than guilt when she looked through a scope. She felt like herself. The 4th target was the mortar team. Elena had identified them 10 minutes after the assault started, positioned on a ridge to the northwest, using the terrain to mask their position from the firebase. They were good. Their fire was accurate and disciplined. But they were also stationary, which was a problem that Elena could solve. She adjusted her scope, compensated for the distance, and waited for the spotter to stand. Even professionals stood sometimes. They had to verify targets. They had to adjust fire. They had to look. The spotter stood. Elena fired. Through the scope, she watched the man collapse, watched the mortar crew scramble, trying to figure out where the fire was coming from. Watched them attempt to reposition. She was already loading the next round. "How many is that?" Miller asked. He was standing behind her now, monitoring the assault force through binoculars, understanding that the battle had fundamentally changed. 7, Elena said. Counter-snipers, spotters, and 1 drone operator. Drone operator. They had eyes in the sky. Elena pointed northwest. UAV staging point about 2 kilometers out. I got him 20 minutes ago when he was establishing uplink. Miller was quiet for a moment. 7 shots. 8. Elena fired again. A squad leader who'd been attempting to organize a push toward the eastern wall collapsed mid-stride. Enemy command structure is dissolving. They're panicking because they don't understand what's happening to them. Okafor's voice came through the radio. "They're falling back, northeast sector, moving away from the firebase." "Don't pursue," Miller ordered. "Maintain position. Let them run." Elena lowered the rifle slightly. Through the scope, she could see the enemy force consolidating into retreat. Not routed, not panicked beyond reason, but definitely abandoning the assault. They'd come expecting to overrun a small firebase with superior numbers and firepower. Instead, they'd walked into a buzzsaw that they couldn't see or counter. "How long have you been doing this?" Miller asked. Elena set the rifle down carefully and looked at him. Miller's face was different now. Not quite respect. That would come later. But recognition. The kind of understanding that came from realizing you were standing next to someone whose training existed in a different universe from your own. Officially, 12 years. Unofficially, longer. Before the military, my father was a hunter, competitive shooter. He taught me when I was young. Elena paused. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Her father had taught her to shoot. What she'd done with that teaching had evolved far beyond anything he'd ever imagined. "I was good at it, stayed good at it. You're better than good." Elena didn't respond to that. She was checking her ammunition count, mentally inventorying what she had left. Enough for another engagement, not enough for a prolonged operation. She'd need to ration carefully if the assault force regrouped. "What made you stop?" Miller asked. "If you were doing this, if you were good at it, what made you stop?" Elena's hand stilled on the ammunition. Through the tent wall, she could hear Torres calling out distance updates, hear Mendez organizing the response, hear the normal sounds of a unit that wasn't about to die. "I hesitated," she said quietly. "During a mission. For 3 seconds, I waited for authorization that never came. It was the wrong call." "What happened?" "My spotter was killed, Sarah Chen. She'd been with me for 6 years. We understood each other without talking. She could read my breathing. I could read her heart rate. We were a unit." Elena's voice didn't change, but something in her chest constricted. "Someone in command made a call I didn't agree with. I hesitated to confirm it. 3 seconds. Miller waited. The target moved. I made the shot anyway, but Sarah was repositioning at the same time. The target's escort had gotten eyes on her. 3 seconds of hesitation meant she wasn't in cover when she needed to be. The memory was there, sharp and clear, the way trauma memories always were. Sarah's voice over the radio, that particular cadence that meant she was about to make a joke. Then the sound that wasn't a joke. The sudden absence of her breathing in Elena's ear. The realization that the unit was broken and would never be whole again. "That's not your fault," Miller said. "It's exactly my fault. She died because I hesitated." "No." Miller turned to face her directly. "She died because someone in command made a bad call and you were following their orders. The hesitation was right. You made the right call by questioning it." Elena looked at him. Miller's jaw was set in that particular way that meant he'd reached a conclusion and wasn't interested in argument. "I've lost people," he continued. "Not like you, not someone that close, but I've lost them. And I've learned that guilt is a story we tell ourselves about choices we didn't have. You did your job. You followed the chain of command. You tried to do what was right. That's all anyone gets." Before Elena could respond, Garrett's voice came through the radio. Weak, but there. "Sarge, East Tower, I'm still alive." Miller was already moving. Sit rep. Took a round through the shoulder, not critical, but I'm pinned and I need extraction. We'll get you. Miller turned to Elena. Can you provide covering fire? Yes. Elena had the rifle back up before he finished the sentence. She could see the watchtower from this angle, could see where Garrett was sheltered behind the reinforced platform. The enemy was still retreating, but there would be stragglers. There would be someone trying to confirm kills. She waited. Torres appeared at the tent opening. Sarge, extraction team is ready. We need 4 minutes to get to Garrett and get him back. You have it, Miller said. Torres moved toward the exit. Elena fired. The sniper that had been positioning to take a final shot at the extraction team dropped. The angle had been difficult. The target was partially concealed by terrain at a distance of nearly 1,200 meters. But Elena had seen the scope flash, had identified the position, had made the calculation and the shot. That's 9, Torres said, his voice tight. 9 what? Mendez appeared from the supply tent. Confirmed kills, Elena said. Enemy personnel. Mendez stared at her, then at the rifle, then at Miller. She's a sniper, Miller said simply. Former special operations. She was hiding in logistics. That explains the catching the rifle thing, Mendez said. The extraction team moved. 4 soldiers, rapid movement, covering fire from Okafor's position. They reached the watchtower in 2 minutes, got Garrett down in 1, and were back inside the firebase perimeter in 45 seconds. Garrett was bleeding but conscious, cursing and alive. Elena remained in position, watching the enemy retreat through the scope. They weren't stopping, weren't regrouping. The assault was over. Miller came back to her position as the sun was starting to rise. The firebase looked like it had been chewed by something large and angry. The east barracks was destroyed. The watchtower was damaged. Blood marked several positions, but it was still standing. The unit was still intact. Thank you, Miller said. Elena lowered the rifle and looked at him. I wasn't doing it for gratitude, Sergeant. I know. You were doing it for the same reason we all do. Because we had to. He paused. And maybe because you needed to forgive yourself for Sarah. Elena didn't answer that. Forgiveness wasn't something that came in a single moment. It came in increments, in the weight that gradually lifted from your shoulders when you stopped asking yourself what if. But standing there in the dawn light, with a rifle in her hands and her unit alive around her, Elena felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding that she'd made a different choice today. That 3 seconds of hesitation didn't define her entire existence, that Sarah would have wanted her to live, not to hide. What now? She asked Miller. Now? Now we prepare for them to try again, because they will. Elena nodded and began to reload her rifle. Through the scope, the enemy was disappearing into the distance, but Miller was right. They would come back. They would try different tactics, different approaches, and Elena would be waiting. She was a sniper. It was what she did. It was, perhaps, what she was meant to do all along. The enemy regrouped at 14:30 hours. Intelligence came through the radio. Allied reconnaissance had spotted them consolidating in a valley 6 kilometers out. They were bringing armor. 2 APCs and what looked like a technical with a mounted weapon system. The assault hadn't failed in their calculation. It had simply delayed. Now they were adapting, bringing heavier support to overwhelm the firebase's defenses. Miller studied the map and did the math. It was a different equation than before, and it still didn't add up in their favor. We have maybe 30 minutes, he said. The firebase's skeleton crew was gathered in the command tent. Elena, Okafor, Chen, Mendez. Jackson was in the medical tent with a through-and-through in his leg. Garrett was heavily sedated, his shoulder wrapped and stabilized. Torres was on perimeter watch, trying not to bleed too much from a shrapnel wound on his arm. Air support? Mendez asked. 35 minutes out minimum. The armor will be here in 25. Can we hold? Chen's voice was steady, but Elena could hear the calculation underneath it. 30 minutes, 25 minutes. The math wasn't subtle. Not against armor, Miller said. We don't have the heavy weapons. We can slow them down, but we can't stop them. Elena was looking at the map. The firebase was positioned on a ridge, which gave them elevation but also made them a fixed target. The armor would establish a perimeter beyond effective small arms range and simply pound them into submission. There was no cover that would stop a .50 caliber round. No position that would be safe once the APCs opened fire. There's an option, Elena said quietly. Everyone looked at her. The observation tower. We could use it as a distraction. Miller's expression didn't change, but she saw him understand immediately. The tower was the tallest structure at the firebase, nearly 40 feet, built on the ridge's highest point. It was reinforced but not heavily armored. It was visible from every approach. Miller said. It would draw their fire, all of it. While they're focused on the tower, the extraction team gets to the rally point. Air support arrives and catches them in the open. We survive. You'd be exposed. Yes, you'd probably die. Probably. Miller's jaw clenched. Elena watched him work through the calculus. The ethics of asking someone to die for the unit, the guilt of accepting the sacrifice, the weight of command that sometimes meant making choices that had no good options. It doesn't have to be you, he said finally. It does, Elena replied. Because it will work if I'm doing it. Anyone else, they hesitate. They get shot trying to reach the position. I won't hesitate. She meant it literally. Her body didn't process hesitation anymore. Fear, yes. Doubt, yes. But the neural pathway between decision and action had been burned clear of anything that slowed it down. Miller held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once they're at the rally point, you climb down. You stay in the tower as long as you can, then you evacuate to the ruins of the East Barracks. There's rubble there. It's your best cover. Understood. And Vasquez? Miller waited until she looked at him directly. Sarah would want you to survive this. Elena didn't respond. She was already moving to gather what she needed. The tower was old and had never been considered permanent. It was built on a framework of metal pipes, bolted together in a pattern that made sense from an engineering standpoint, but didn't account for concentrated fire. Elena climbed quickly, finding the rungs by muscle memory and instinct. Her shoulder wound, she hadn't mentioned it, hadn't made it a priority, was bleeding again. But she ignored it. The observation position at the top was small, barely large enough for 2 people. She settled into it and waited. The armor appeared at 14:55 hours. 2 APCs, moving fast, confident. A technical trailing behind, the gunner already traversing his weapon system toward the firebase. They were expecting light resistance. They weren't expecting coordinated defense. They're approaching the perimeter, Torres reported over the radio. His voice was tight but professional. Wait for my signal, Miller ordered. Elena watched through the scope. The lead APC was maybe 400 meters out. She could take out the gunner, could take out the driver, could damage the engine block with the right ammunition in the right place, but she didn't move. Now, Miller said. Okafor's gun position opened up. 3-round bursts, disciplined fire aimed at the gunner's position on the technical. The technical's gun swung toward the firebase, but the gunner was already reacting, already diving for cover as rounds punched through the vehicle's armor. The APCs accelerated. Elena fired. The round went through the technical's engine block and into the ground beyond. The vehicle lurched to a stop, smoke rising from the hood. The gunner was already bailing, running for the APC that was approaching fast. Extraction team, move now, Miller commanded. Chen grabbed Jackson. 2 other soldiers grabbed gear and ammunition. They were out of the firebase's main gate in 30 seconds, moving toward the rally point 3 kilometers south. From Elena's position in the tower, she could see them running, could see the moment the APCs noticed the movement. The armor opened fire. The rounds came up the ridge, targeting the firebase's defensive positions. The tower shook under the impact. Not direct hits. The armor wasn't trying to collapse it. They were suppressive fire, trying to pin down the defense while they maneuvered. Elena adjusted her aim and fired at the lead APC's viewport. The round cracked through the armor at an angle that didn't penetrate, but it got their attention. The vehicle pivoted, its gun swinging toward the tower. The first round hit the base of the structure. The tower swayed. Elena felt it in her bones, felt the pipes flex in ways that pipes shouldn't flex. The second round hit higher. The structure groaned like something alive. "Extraction team is clear," Torres reported. "Rally point reached." "Elena, get down," Miller ordered. She was already moving, already climbing down as fast as gravity would allow. The third round hit the tower's midsection. She could hear the metal tearing, could feel the structural integrity failing. She was 20 feet from the ground when the framework finally gave. The tower didn't collapse dramatically. It disassembled. The bolts sheared, the pipes twisted, and everything came down in a cascading failure that turned the structure into wreckage in the space of 3 seconds. Elena was falling. She'd trained for this. Not the falling exactly, but the impact. Combat medic training, survival training. You don't fight the fall. You roll with it, minimize the damage, survive by accepting what's coming. She landed on rubble from the East Barracks, the wind driven from her lungs but her bones intact. The armor continued firing at the tower's remains, believing she was still there, still fighting. Elena crawled deeper into the rubble, found a gap between collapsed sections of corrugated metal, and went still. The fire continued for another minute. Then, in the distance, she heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors. The armor vehicles pivoted and began to retreat, accelerating away from the firebase. The Allied extraction team was coming in fast, 2 Apaches that made short work of the technical that had been trying to escape. By the time Elena climbed out of the rubble, the firebase was secured and the medical team was already moving toward her position. She saw Miller's face when they found her, saw the relief there and underneath it, something else. Respect, recognition. The understanding that whatever Elena had been before, she was something different now. 6 months later, Elena was standing in front of a classroom. The recovery had been slow. 2 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, internal bleeding that had required surgery. But she'd survived the tower, survived the collapse, survived the weight of guilt that she'd carried for so long. The classroom was at Fort Benning, in the Special Operations Training Wing. 12 snipers, newly selected for advanced instruction. They ranged in age from 23 to 45. Some were men, some were women. All of them were quiet, focused, intense. They were waiting to see what Elena would teach them. "Sniping is mathematics and physics," she began. "But it's also something else. It's a conversation between you and a weapon and a target, and that conversation happens at a distance where you can see the moment your decision becomes someone's death." She walked slowly along the front of the classroom. "You'll learn to make impossible shots. You'll learn wind compensation and ballistics and how to read the environment. But what they're not going to teach you in the official curriculum is how to live with the weight of what you do. How to make decisions that end lives and still be able to sleep. How to carry people you've killed and people you couldn't save." A female sniper in the 3rd row was looking at her with sudden intensity. Elena recognized the look. She'd worn it herself not so long ago. "I'm going to teach you that part," Elena continued, "because the technical skill is easy. The math is easy. What's hard is the moral architecture you have to build inside yourself to make peace with the decisions you make." After the class, the female sniper waited until the others had filed out. She approached Elena's desk carefully, the way someone approaches something dangerous that they hope won't hurt them. "Sergeant Vasquez." Her name tag read Torres. No relation, probably, but Elena's instinct said otherwise. "Yes, my father was at Crimson Peak. Private Torres. He said—" She stopped, gathering her words. "He said you saved the entire unit. He said you went back into combat after you'd already left the military. He said you carried a weight that nobody else could carry, and you carried it anyway." Elena set down her papers. "Your father was a good soldier. He talks about you like you're, I don't know, like you're someone who figured something out. about how to keep going even when everything in you wants to stop. Torres paused. Is that true? Elena thought about Sarah's face, thought about the 3-second hesitation that had haunted her for 7 years, thought about the tower collapsing, the rubble, the moment she'd crawled out and realized she was still alive. I didn't figure anything out, Elena said quietly. But I learned that guilt is a story, and stories can be revised if you're willing to write a different ending. Torres nodded slowly, like she was translating something in her head. Thank you, Sergeant. After she left, Elena sat alone in the classroom for a long time. Through the window, she could see the training grounds where snipers were practicing their craft, making impossible shots, building skills that would carry them through wars and into the rest of their lives. She'd been given a second chance. Not absolution. She didn't believe in that. But a chance to take the weight she carried and transform it into something useful, teaching others how to make peace with difficult choices, teaching them that hesitation could be wisdom, not weakness. On her desk was a photograph in a frame. Sarah Chen, laughing at some joke that had been made years ago. Elena looked at it every day. I'm teaching them, she said, quietly to the photograph. The way we should have been taught. The way you would have taught them. The photograph didn't answer. It never did. But Elena had stopped needing it to. She'd learned to carry both the guilt and the purpose, the weight and the meaning, the memory and the future. She picked up her lesson plans for tomorrow's class and gathered her things to leave. Outside, the sun was setting over the training grounds, casting long shadows across the rifle ranges. In those shadows, another generation of snipers was learning what Elena had learned the hard way, that the most difficult shot isn't the one you make across 1,000 meters. It's the one you make on yourself, the choice to forgive, the decision to survive, the moment you accept that what broke you might also be what makes you whole. Elena walked toward the parking lot, her rifle case in one hand, her lesson plans in the other, and for the first time in 7 years, her shoulders felt light.